to you. So I'm going to have them join me at this moment. All right. So I'm going to ask them each to introduce themselves and tell us just really quickly what it is that you do. So I'm going to start with Curtis States. Curtis, I just introduced you, but you can actually tell us what it is that you do, Curtis.
So I'm actually currently working on a pilot project that the government is funding that seeks to examine how cultural context plays into the disproportionate number of Black children that are in child protective services. So in addition to doing that, I also am a counselor at an addiction center. I work with special needs kids. I got my hands in a few different pots, but those are my primary functions right now.
Thank you. Very important work, sir. Danielle Burkett, can you tell us a little bit about what you do?
Hi, so I am currently an educator. I've been working for TDSB since 2017. I'm an occasional teacher, but because I'm an occasional teacher, I've been able to see the experiences and the structures that multiple schools have had to set in place to either uplift or to sometimes allow for Black students to fall to the wayside.
Wow, okay, we'll be getting into that stuff. Nathaniel Frey Smith, what do you do, sir? And I'm gonna ask you quickly to unmute yourself, sir, so that people can hear what it is that you do, man.
You're absolutely correct. I'm a social worker. I work with youth in custody. Aside from that, I'm a business owner, and I try to promote events that bring us together and uplift us.
All right, awesome. And finally, Kamisha Siblis, can you tell us what it is that you do?
I am a professor at the University of Windsor for the School of Social Work. I have past experience in child welfare, clinical social work, and school social work. So that's sort of what I bring to my pedagogy.
Okay, awesome. So I want to welcome you all, and we're going to have what I believe is going to be a very rich discussion tonight. We're going to start off by looking at a clip from one of our episodes. The episode in particular is Respectability Politics. So we're going to take a quick look at this clip, and then we're going to come back and chop it up.
It's just here.
I mean, who cares?
You would if it kept you from getting a second interview or made people scared to stand or sit next to you.
We think we are doing ourselves a favor when we labor mentally and physically, literally killing ourselves to be what society wants us to be. But can we actually curl, straighten, twist, lock, fade, or shave our way to respectability? I will do what I please with my hair.
All right. So there's all kinds of different politics. People talk about height politics and all kinds of things, respectability politics. We're going to go into that, but I would like to ask, I'm going to ask Curtis, if you could break down for us what respectability politics actually is.
So, you know, in the simplest terms, really, it's about sort of the idea that that we are tying to appearances or to specific sets of ideologies, value systems, that we're deciding that we're going to judge somebody based on their appearances, and further to that, that we ascribe meaning to those appearances. I don't know if any of the other panelists want to fill that out a little bit more.
Okay, Nathaniel, would you like to add to that? Respectability politics, when you hear that, what does that say to you?
Hey guys, let me show you how to be appeasing to white people.
Straight up. Okay, so with that being said, I'm going to ask Kamisha first. Which side of the debate, and let me sort of talk about the debate first of all, there is this ongoing sort of tug of war that we need as, and when I say we, I'm talking about particularly those who identify as Black or Black Canadians, need to think about how they're going to present in society, and there's a debate about whether you should try to conform to social norms to make yourself more appealing and more accessible, or if you should sort of continue to be who you are and force people to accept you for who you are. Where do you stand on that debate? Is it well, have you heard about that debate? Are you familiar with it? Where do you stand on it?
I absolutely am familiar with the debate. Coming from the school setting, there have been plenty of stories in the media about students who were suspended or sent home because, their hair wasn't acceptable. And I think, to me, I want to start with the fact that for me, respectability politics is kind of a misnomer. It really is acceptability politics, because I'm not sure how it is that we garner respect by not being ourselves. What we're doing is trying to be accessible, is trying to be legible to the dominant culture, and trying to access mobility. Because really what we don't want to be white. What we're trying to do is access white privilege. And so when we are tapping into this respectability politics, it makes it very difficult for us to respect ourselves. And I don't know that white people are respecting us either, because we are our values. We're denouncing our values. Really, we are showing values that really align with white culture, so that we can get ahead. So the question of whether we should or shouldn't is a tough one, because we have to survive. We have our ambitions. We want to access the privileges that our white counterparts have. And unfortunately, the world is such that we often can't, unless we are legible to them, unless they can trust us. And they can trust us when we look like them, when we talk like them, when we show that our value systems are aligned with theirs. But then again, unless we do sort of thrust ourselves out into the world, we're not going to get a world that starts to see us differently either.
Interesting. Okay. So Danielle, when we performed this piece in a particular hair salon, and I'll talk a little bit more about what GIA is doing with going into barbershops and hair salons and performing pieces, and then speaking to the patrons and the hair technicians about what it is that they've seen. But when we went into this particular hair salon, one of the hair technicians, the owner actually, was saying what she believed we needed to do was to get our foot in the door first and then be who we are afterward. So maybe you're not going into the interview with your hair a certain way, whether it's for girls, if you're gonna do something different with it, straighten it, whatever the case might be, and then once you're in, then you can do what you'd like to do. Do you agree with that as a strategy? What are your thoughts on that?
That's a tough one. Because I mean, like, I've been in situations. I used to have locks. I haven't permed my hair since I was 13. So that's 15 years now. And when I first had locks in high school, I had applied to, I'm not going to say the name of the place. But one of their like straight out rules in their hiring policy was not to hire people who had dreadlocks. And I had purposely like pulled my hair like really back. I had gelled it like slick back, like to the gods. And I asked them, like, is my hair still appropriate? And they said no. And they didn't realize that it was locks until I had pointed it out. And part of me kind of regrets saying that. But I had spoken to my friends about it later on, and some of them had actually pushed them back when they had applied later on, and then they ended up getting the job. So, but I wasn't really in the place, like, emotionally to like say something at that time. But I do think that there is a necessity to fall into respectability politics. But at the end of the day, it doesn't change anything. Like we saw with Christian Cooper in Central Park a couple of weeks ago. And then people were posting like that he worked for Marvel, that he worked at Harvard, that he like was all these accomplished things. But at the end of the day, when a racist looks at you and all they see is the color of your skin, it doesn't matter how many degrees you have, where you went to school, what your family background is. It just matters that you're Black and that makes them uncomfortable.
Wow.
And so I don't know if respectability politics saves us. It does get us ahead in like workspaces and educational spaces sometimes, but on like a day-to-day basis in terms of like stepping into the world, like it doesn't really protect us from anything.
Wow. Okay. All right. So we're talking about respectability politics, and one of the things that we do is we all go into this, whether we're thinking about it or not. We all have a different voice that we use when we're speaking to people who look like us versus a voice that we use when we're speaking to people who do not. And it's almost, you don't even have to think about it. You just go into it. You just launch into it. And not just our voice, even the way we laugh. I find that I'm laughing differently when I'm speaking to individuals or I'm sharing a joke with individuals who don't look like me. I wanted to ask about this whole, well, first of all, it's called switching up. Again, or code switching, right? I'd like to ask Kamisha about how do you talk to youth about code switching? Do you tell them that, would you tell a youth that it's necessary in order to move forward in this world? What are your thoughts with regards to how you would counsel a youth about code switching and the switch up?
I don't think that I would advise a youth that they needed to change anything about the way they spoke unless they weren't getting their messages across, right? I think communication is complicated. And I mean, there's the message that you believe that you're sending, and then there's the message that the people are receiving. And so I think for me, to be able to code switch, again, is currency, right? And so it really depends on what it is they want to get from the interaction, what it is they serve to gain, what it is they serve to lose. And that's for all of it, right? Are we losing parts of ourselves, of our souls, to be able to convey certain messages or portray ourselves differently than we authentically are? And if we are, we have to weigh that out against what we're gaining. I think I really liked what Danielle said about the fact that, you know, when we're talking about code switching or respectability politics, the key is that it helps us individually, but it doesn't help us as a people. It doesn't help us in our various communities because it doesn't help Black survival. It's about assimilating, and assimilating is really is genocidal.
Wow, that's strong language, genocidal. Nathaniel, real quick, how do you feel when after you code switch? How does it make you feel?
It depends on the code switch, of course, but like just thinking about that and thinking about learning that I was a perceptive person and no one really told me I had to change certain things. Like they told me my hair had to be acceptable, whatever that means, and that, you know, my attire, I get being professional in attire. But one thing I found myself doing as well is changing my voice when I was younger, especially after puberty. It wasn't just the vernacular I used, it was the tone of my voice, and not in like, you know, when you're talking to your parents and they're like, don't use that tone with me. No, like totally in just taking the bass out of my voice to seem less threatening and to be more appealing. Wow. So the feeling that, at least for me, it was overwhelming. I didn't understand why it took so much energy being in those spaces. And one of the things was I didn't feel good about taking the bass out of my voice and not saying things with my chest. Like it just felt damn near cowardly, you know? So I kind of, once I started to become aware of it, do everything I could to just speak like me and only have the one voice. I mean, almost except for my voicemail sometimes, but yeah, it's still a work in progress with certain things, but it doesn't feel great at all.
I remember, when I was going to York University, I would actually have to have a conversation in my head before I went to talk to my professors because I was speaking so much slang at the time. I actually would have to think about what I was going to say and how I was going to say it before I actually would approach them because, I wanted to, as Kamisha was saying, not lose currency with them and have them still see me as intelligent. But I want to bring things back to hair because hair is always a huge challenge when it comes to respectability politics. And I wanted to ask what it is about Black hair that seems to make it such a hot button issue. Do you think that, let's say, for instance, Southeast Asian people have to think about hair the way we do? What is it about Black hair in particular that makes it such a hot button issue or challenge for us? Curtis, what are your thoughts?
I don't know the answer about whether or not other communities struggle the way that we do, but I would surmise that they don't. And the reason for that is because I think that humans in general are uncomfortable with the unknown, right? So the example I give is if you take an 8-month-old baby and they see their parent every day, and then one day the parent is wearing a big pair of weird glasses, the baby's going to swat at those glasses and try to get them off of that face because something I'm uncomfortable with. And I think our hair is very unique in that you can style it in ways and do things with it that other hair textures cannot do. And I think that represents that unfamiliarity. That's that I'm uncomfortable. I don't understand, like, how can you have a cameo, a box cut? How does your hair standing up? Is there a product? What's going on? How come when I twist my hair, it doesn't lock and stay in position? There's so many things we can do with our hair. And I think framing our face, right? Generally, when we make contact with somebody, we are focusing on their face and the immediate surrounding area. And so for people who aren't familiar with our hair, there's this immediate thing that I don't know anything about. I'm not sure how that works. They just can't swat our hair off. So that dissonance, that uncomfortability comes into play. And so I think that's why we keep having this conversation and this dialogue around why is something not working here? What's wrong here? Why are we having difficulty in these spaces navigating with other people?
Danielle, what are your reactions like when someone of different culture attempts to touch your hair versus someone in our culture or a Black Canadian trying to touch your hair? How does it differ? Does it differ?
Okay, so I never experienced, because my mom permed my hair from a very young age. So in grade school, when I think a lot of other Black kids were getting like deep hands in the hair kind of situation, I wasn't getting that because I had permed hair.
Okay.
But I remember I started high school with dreadlocks, so like people were just like confused, but they didn't really touch it or do anything to it because it just looks like braids straight down. But when I cut off my dreadlocks for the first time, end of grade 11, beginning of grade 12, I remember sitting in my law class and this girl that was sitting behind me, who I'd known since grade 9, like we didn't really have any problems. And she just like dug hand like straight into my afro. And then like I turned around and I'm like, what are you doing? She's like, I've never seen hair like that. Like I just wanted to touch it. I'm like, but it's not your hair. It's mine. It's on my head. It's my, like, why I don't understand why you need to touch it to understand it. Like for me, if you're really that concerned about understanding what Afro textured hair feels like, walk into a Black beauty store, buy some hair. Touch it up all you want. Have like a whole set of wigs just like in your room and just like touch them up all you want, but you don't need to touch my head. You don't. And like I do find that since I've gotten, because I cut my locks, I got locks again in university, and then right after I got married, I cut my locks off again. And I have found that it's not as often, but there was a lot of situations where other people who had locks would come up and touch my locks and be like, "Oh, I love your hair.
Okay.
I like how you styling it."
Right.
Just like, I'm not a big like physical touch person, especially people that I don't know. So that would make me a little bit uncomfortable. But otherwise, I don't know. But I did want to, if we have time, I just wanted to go back to something that Curtis was saying about like our struggle with like hair politics versus other cultures. And I would say that the only other culture that I would say that has nothing similar, not in the same way, but a similar experience of like having to choose between your culture identity and your hair and fitting into a white supremacist world would be Indigenous people. Just because like their hair and like growing out their hair is like a very spiritual experience. And like even from like residential schools in Canada and the United States, like cutting off a child's hair was a symbol of cutting them off from their culture. And for a lot of them, like culturally speaking, if you cut your hair off, it was a sign of mourning. And so you were having like 6-year-olds and 5-year-olds that were understood that cutting their hair off meant that like someone had died, but like no one explaining to them what happened, and then them not being able to see their family. So then like a lot of like trauma coming from that.
Yes.
And so like a lot of Indigenous people who currently wear their hair, especially for Indigenous men who currently wear their hair long, especially because they've been mixed with so much white over the centuries, like if it weren't for their hair, you wouldn't know that they were Indigenous just by looking at them. And so choosing to wear their hair long and wearing it in braids is a political statement for them. And also when they walk into spaces and they have their braids or they have their hair long, they end up having to deal with a whole bunch of other issues, with whether it's being followed by store clerks or being harassed by police. Like there was just an Indigenous man in Ottawa the other day that got killed by police, and the police officer got acquitted because it was seen as justified, but all he was holding was a piece of wood that he had just been carving, because he had just gotten into carving to like get back to his spirituality. And like he was having a mental like situation, and the crisis caused him to go to the pharmacy so he can get his medication. And he had his crisis while he was going, and just got caught in the crosshairs of a cop, like not understanding what he was going through, and then like turning on him because of that. So I would say that they're the only other group that maybe feels that kind of push and pull with their hair choices. But at the same time, it's still not exactly the same, because if they were to cut their hair off, or even when they have their hair long and out, like it still resembles white hair. And whereas like what Curtis was saying, like ours is so different from everybody else's.
Right. Okay. So we're going to take a quick look at a clip here that again sort of touches on the stereotypes connected to hair, and then we'll get back into things.
Who's gonna let a black man with braids come into their house to fix their furnace? Why would anybody trust you when everyone they see on TV or in the movies acting like a criminal looks just like you?
So is hair in our community connected to social status? Kamisha, what do you think? Is hair in our community connected to social status?
I think in a way, because hair is so phenotypical, right? It's such a phenotypical characteristic. And it oftentimes, when we're looking at proximity to whiteness, people with hair that is closer to white people's hair often have skin that's closer to white people's skin, or other features that are, right? So we get getting back into shadeism.
Yes.
And again, back into the respectability politics and how close we are again to whiteness. So absolutely, and we know historically that it was the lighter skinned people who happened to, if they were mixed, happened to have the straighter hair, the straighter noses, and whatnot. They were the ones that were able to achieve upward mobility. So yes.
Okay. So Curtis, if your doctor, you're going to the doctor, you're not feeling well, and your doctor comes out with a hairstyle resembling Allen Iverson's cornrows back in the day, how does that impact you?
It doesn't impact me, but I believe it impacts others. I really try my best to recognize that people are individuals and that their identities are theirs to express. I try my best to create a space that's safe enough for people to articulate their identities in whatever way they see fit. I can understand that some people might make some negative associations, but those negative associations come from the media and from the way that we're portrayed, particularly around violence and incarceration. Do I have some kind of a negative association with like I certainly wouldn't look at somebody having their hair braided and think to myself, that they're some specific type of person, and that might come from in my younger days when my hair was a little thicker. I mean, I had my hair braided up, so I mean, for us, I think if one of us is judging another of us, it's because we've been so impacted by the white lens. We've been impacted so much by the way we are shaped and framed in the world, and it's a really tough thing to get away from, because we see ourselves reflected in the media, and there are all these tropes that are paraded in front of us all the time. And it's hard to try to block those from your subconscious. They seep into your psyche, and you almost begin to perform some of these things because they are what you believe you are supposed to be, or what you're told the image of you is.
Yeah, point. So Nathaniel, I remember, and I'll get to you in a second there, Kenisha. I see your hand putting it up like a schoolgirl. Nathaniel, I remember at a particular gathering, you were talking about how your uncle and one of my good friends, missing so much, Cameron, was telling you that you needed to cut your locks. And he was very adamant about giving you a haircut. He was a barber, right? And he wanted to cut your hair off. When you hear those kinds of things coming from your family, how does that impact you? When you hear your family members saying, I don't know that there is any Black boy that at some point hadn't heard their parents or some family members say, you need to get a haircut, cut your head. You can't go out like that, How does that impact you?
So by the time I had locks, I had already had that conversation with my uncle so often. I had already listened to him and cut my hair so many times. But, I mean, for you guys know how I was as a kid. It was kind of like, I'm going to do what I'm going to do. So it's like, I tried it your way, and cutting my hair and looking prim and proper, these people still treat me like I'm a thug or a hoodlum. So if I'm doing the things that you're asking me to do, I guess by proxy of what they're asking or what you believe that is necessary for us to get ahead, and it's not working, then I'm going to do what I want to do and figure things out my way. You say it may be harder, and that may be true, but I'm going to just figure it out. And it's difficult because it's like my family grew up like trying to impart wisdom on me about my culture and about my heritage and about Blackness. But at the same time, we still perpetuated so many of the things, So like being a young kid coming up and seeing that, it was kind of internally a battle as well, because it's like, okay, maybe, there is some validity to what they're saying. look presentable. So if you are going to have braids or cornrows, Nate, try to make sure they're presentable. When you see them getting messy, take them out, do whatever you can to make sure you're still looking presentable. But then as I got older, it's like I understand, especially when I had locks, when to retwist or when to put it in a ponytail or whatever. But I still kind of feel like it's all foolishness, because the knowledge that I had and the opportunities I got, whether because of that or because of somebody I knew or whatever, was never truly affected in a way that I held on to. So I saw my blackness as synonymous with any other way I dress it up. It's still me being a black male, and do as much as you can to educate yourself. However, at the end of the day, know that you're still a black male. You could be the president of the United States. If you're driving by yourself, you can get pulled over and still treated the same. So it's like, yeah.
Okay, so Kamisha, you're gonna have the last word, and I kind of want you. I know you had a comment that you wanted to make, but I would also like you to sort of touch on, what do you think? Are there ways that with regards to hair, are there certain professions that just demand a certain type of hairstyle in order to be taken seriously? So, for instance, a black female lawyer with part of her hair shaved in designs on the side. Does that work? Should she reconsider? What do you think?
So what I wanted to say with regard to your initial question about status and hair, the other thing is that hair, what your hair can and can't do, gives you access to cultural capital, right? So I have a daughter, and she's in ballet, and with ballet, you have there are exams, right? It's a classical style of dance, and that's problematic as well. What we take as classic and standards is very Eurocentric,
okay.
right? But
yes.
with these exams, there are certain things that you must do, and one of those things is to pull your hair up into a bun and wear a net over the bun. And so for a lot of little girls, like I was a little girl who could not catch her hair up into a bun, not to save her life, right? My hair just didn't do that. Wasn't long enough, wasn't, and just, wouldn't slick down. And so that would restrict me from going into sort of professional ballet, having passed these exams, right? And there are a lot of these practices that are othering our Black girls and really teaching us what these standards are. So again, if you don't have the cultural capital, like you can't say that, I was in the whatever 8th grade in ballet, or other sort of whatever classical standards, then we are again being further marginalized, right? And lacking access to, lacking inclusion really to the in crowd, right? To the privileged crowds. The other piece is, yes, so whether there are certain professions where hairstyles, I guess, dictate, I guess for me, anecdotally, I was in a position where I had to testify in court. And for my trial preparation, I went in, I had, my hair natural. I was wearing a vibrant lipstick. And I was told by a Black lawyer, a Black woman lawyer, make sure I don't show up to court that way. Tone down the lipstick. Wear glasses if I can find glasses. Wear glasses. I do have glasses. I don't even have to wear glasses. Wear glasses. Put my hair back. So, there are certainly ways that people would like to see us, and I always push those boundaries, particularly when I'm in those spaces, because we need to start making room for each other. But regardless of how we're presenting ourselves, if we can get our feet in, our foot in the door, then we can start again pushing those boundaries, and sort of pushing the floodgates open, so that we can have more of us in there, so that we are the norm, so that we are redefining what's normative.
Nice. Okay. Thank you. And I want to encourage our viewing audience there to please comment, ask questions. And as I mentioned at the top of our program, we hope to be able to get to some of those comments and questions a little later on. So we're going to shift gears right now, and we're going to go into a different part of our discussion. We're going to take a look at a clip. This is from a piece called Family Feud, and it sort of talks about identity. So let's take a quick look at this, and then we're going to get into some stuff about that.
Whoa, I'm Canadian.
Listen, I hear you, but on a census, I definitely think my sense of self is more accurately depicted by the terms African Canadian or even Black Canadian.
Forget the whole hyphenated identity
Fine.
thing. Whether you're born here or born there, you should always be prepared to rep as a straight up Jamaican or a Grenadian.
Somali or Ghanaian.
Trini to the bone or Barbadian.
Ethiopian or Nigerian.
Antiguan, Lucian, Vinci, Haitian.
Too many islands.
Represent being Brazilian or even Dominicano, papi.
But you cannot be Canadian.
Okay, so I'm going to actually go one by one on this question here, and I'm going to ask each one of you, how do you identify and why, right? So do you hyphenate? Do you know what? I'm not even going to give any more examples because I just want to hear what you guys are going to say. So I'm going to start with Danielle. How do you identify, or even on a census, what would you like to see to help you accurately depict who you believe you are?
Honestly, I'm okay with the census just calling me Black. But that's more so because how I identify is not how I'm accepted. Like I identify as African, Jamaican, Canadian, because I acknowledge like my African heritage and I'm very proud of it. But culturally, I associate with Jamaica. That being said, I was born in Canada. My dad came here when he was 8. My mom was born here. So like the way I was raised was very much like a watered down Jamaican. And I have been told by many a Jamaican, mostly the older generation of Jamaicans, but by many Jamaicans that I'm not Jamaican. And that I'm Canadian. But then I'm asked on a consistent basis by Canadians, especially white Canadians, where am I from? And then like I always like feel like this like little sense of like I'm a jab you when I say, oh, my mom was born in Montreal. And then they just have this like look of like, oh, wait, so like you could be Canadian and like your mom can be Canadian and like you're still Black, like. And I meet Americans that don't even know that Black people live up here. But because Canadians don't really accept me as Jamaican and Jamaicans don't really accept me as Jamaican, then I kind of just have to be Black. But I don't know. I want to be more than that.
This double marginalization is so real, right? Like, because I would get that in my house as well. Like, I would tell them, I'm Barbadian, and they no, you're not. And then they start listing some fruits and some drinks and some other foods that I don't know, and see, you're not Barbadian because you don't know this or whatever, right? And then you come outside of your house and you tell people you're Canadian. No, you're not. It's this double marginalization, and then you go to a predominantly Jamaican church and tell them that you're Barbadian Canadian and what that, and you're marginalized yet again. So it's just challenging, man. But let's go with Nate. How do you identify, sir?
I'm Afro-Caribbean Canadian, but Black. It's just like what you guys are saying, where there's that marginalization on all sides. Being born here to some people means that I'm Canadian and Canadian alone. My parents not being born here means that I should claim wherever they're from to some people. And then my roots claim that I'm African, from African descent. So it's like, I don't care for the label necessarily, but I do very much, and I am very much aware of who I am in any setting I'm in. So.
Okay. Kamisha, how do you identify?
So that depends on who I'm talking to. It depends on what my where I'm trying to position myself politically as well as culturally. My political identity is Black. I'm not one that I don't like the identification of person of color. I think that's problematic. There are a lot of problematic references to.
Can you unpack that a little bit? Like, why is person of color problematic for you?
For me, person of color again centers whiteness, right? There's white people, and then there's everyone else that has color. So right, so that's problematic for me. Politically,
Okay.
black really resonates with me. And when I'm asked, typically I am a Black Canadian of Jamaican heritage. When I'm asked by Canadians how I identify, I will say Canadian as a point of resistance because they're expecting something else. And I try to keep it there, just ground it. I'm Canadian, born here, right? So, yeah.
So it's fluid. Okay, all right. Curtis, how do you identify, sir?
So, I think for myself, first and foremost, I kind of identify as Black. And I think it's really important to acknowledge that our experience here really isn't so different from many other parts of the world. And while I respect that some people might want to really hang on to this cultural identity and mesh with whatever they believe Canadian is, part of my issue with that is that I'm not sure what Canadian is supposed to be, other than it means I was born within some geographic boundaries that some white people drew at some point without any consultation from the people that were originally on the land, right? And the reality is these imaginary barriers, what separates us out from the United States in many places is arbitrary, right? Just as it is what separates us out from our province from Quebec. Like, you don't drive over some natural barrier, some dividing river or a rocky range of mountains. Like, it's literally a sign that somebody put up that says you are now in Quebec. And so I trust that, we divide ourselves geographically all the time. We divide ourselves, they're American, we're Canadian. Their experience is different. They're from Quebec. They speak French. We're here in Ontario. Their experience is different. Here in the city, they're in Malvern. We're in Brampton. That's a whole other. You don't want to mess with that. And we divide all the way down to the point where you got kids in school, in high schools, across from each other. That's that school. This is this school. And I'm really wary of being divisive, particularly when we have so many things coming at us, challenging us in so many ways. I think it's really important for us to find common ground as much as we can. And I don't see the common ground in terms of being Canadian. I don't know what that's supposed to mean. Is it I'm supposed to eat maple syrup? Is it that I have Molson Canadian? Like, I'm going off of the commercials that I see, all these images that are fed to us in the media. Is it that I'm supposed to go to, if I go to Tingz all the time, I'm Canadian, right? Am I Canadian if I have citizenship? Am I Canadian if I've been here for 10 years and I go to Tingz and I eat maple syrup and I ice skate and I play hockey? Is that Canadian enough? Or am I Canadian if my parents were born here, but if my parents weren't born here, but I was born here, then I'm not as Canadian as you? I don't support the idea of all this imaginary measuring and ascribing value based on what someone thinks it should be. Again, if you identify as Canadian and that's important to you, I respect that. I think people should be able to speak their identity freely, but I don't necessarily understand why we place so much emphasis on saying that this flag represents something that I need to stand behind.
Fair enough. Kamisha,
I'm trying to keep it short, believe me.
No, I know, I can tell. Kamisha, what is it that you wanted to jump in and say?
Oh, I didn't think I wanted to jump in and say anything.
Oh, okay, I thought I saw your hand up. Okay.
No, sorry.
All right, no worries. Okay, so Curtis sort of segued into what I wanted to talk about, because he's talking about unity. And I remember the great Fitzroy Gordon having this discussion on G98 one time, talking about where is the Black community. And there was all kinds of discussion around that because first, people were having issue or taking issue with the term Black community, and then others were trying to figure out where it was, right? Or if it even existed, or if it could exist. What are your thoughts on the Black community? First of all, the term Black community, is it problematic? Is it necessary? What are your thoughts on that, Kamisha?
So I initially found it extremely problematic because I feel like it reinforces the notion of us being monolithic, and really conflates all of the diversity within Black populations. I then started to see it as again a political identity, right? If we can identify as one community, that gives us critical mass, right? So that we can stand up against this really big force of whiteness and anti-Blackness. And so we are communal in that we have shared experiences because we navigate the world in Black bodies, and our experiences aren't necessarily those that it is not our identity, but how we are identified, right? And so how we're seen. So to that end, I still don't use Black community, but I will say Black communities. And still feel like we are unified as several Black communities under the umbrella of Blackness.
Okay. So Nathaniel, how do we galvanize a group as diverse as ours? How do you get a Somali Canadian and a Jamaican Canadian and a Brazilian Canadian and a Jamaican, or a Grenadian Canadian? How do you galvanize? Because Kamisha's talking about the fact that certain things happen to us. For instance, right now there's this all of the challenges with what happened with the young lady on the balcony, right? Who fell to her death, and the community's trying to come together and galvanize and try to, they're demanding answers, right? How do you galvanize this group? Because as Kamisha said, we're very diverse. How do we do that?
It's interesting. I don't know if I have one simple answer, but I do understand that we do have a shared experience of being 3/5 of a man. We do have a shared experience of dog lives mattering more than ours. So for me, it's unfortunate that it seems to take police brutality to almost galvanize us. I mean, enough for us to have this conversation, enough for us to, I guess, march. Because exactly like what Kamisha was saying, like there are communities, but the reason I'm not bothered by being called the Black community is because I also realize that I belong to a family. And in my Frey Smith family, there are cousins I may not part with because they're on stuff that I'm not on. There are family members that, don't even claim us in public, but will come to the birthdays and come to the events. And at the end of the day, we're still a family, you know what I mean? And I still love them as a family, even though we have different experiences. So I think if we can understand, if we can truly understand the power that we would yield if we came together, it would help us come together a bit more. And then I think when it comes to our youth, especially, like the thing about being Canadian, quick interjection on the Canadian thing. I didn't start saying I was Canadian until I started traveling, if I'm honest. because when I traveled, I had to separate myself from Americans because it was like it was a funny part to it, but it was also kind of like a slight danger to it, depending on where I was traveling, where I was flying in
Okay.
the
Yeah,
world,
yeah,
right?
yeah, yeah, yeah.
So it's kind of the same thing with this, where in our Black communities there are friends that I grew up with who hate it. Like they're like, I'm not Black, you know, Ethiopian friends, Eritrean friends.
Mm-hmm.
Then there's
Mm-hmm.
also different African communities, whether it's my West African friends who didn't like to align themselves with, you know, Jamaicans because they're bad Blacks. You know what I mean? So there are these
Mm-hmm.
different
Mm-hmm.
things, but when we went to the store together and no one cared about those things, they just cared about following us because we're a group of young Black males. When we're walking down the street and get pulled up on by the police, no one cares about those things. I think for me that makes me realize, yo, we have these differences and we should be able to talk among ourselves about them because they can be hurtful and they can, you know, there's a lot of knowledge needed there.
Yes.
However, unifying is necessary, you know, not
Mm-hmm.
allowing them to see that we have, you know, these differences between us that we do need to discuss and that are very important,
Mm-hmm.
and collectively coming together to show a unified front on the issues that face us all as Black people. And I specifically say us as Black people because what happens is we get thrown into the pool of I don't want to say colored, but of others. You know what I mean? POC, people of color, and not just Black people. And there are very serious issues that
Yeah.
just face us, that
Right.
don't face the other POCs. So it's like
Yes. Yes.
we definitely need to come together in order to talk about those things, or we'll never be taken seriously, and they'll always be able to push and point out all the differences we have, and then that will kind of break us down. So sorry,
Okay.
getting back to how we do it, I don't
Mm-hmm.
know if it's that we need to overly emphasize that these issues are facing us all collectively. Um,
Mm,
but I do think that's a part of it.
sure.
Yeah.
I remember it was a couple of years back, World Cup, and Brazil was in the finals against, I think it might have been Italy or something. And a Somali woman saw, well, my sister and the Somali woman were on the bus. And she turned to my sister and said, "Who's in the finals?" And my sister told her, and she said, "I want Brazil to win. They look like us." And it was this, you know, that it just, I don't know. My sister said she didn't expect it, and it made her feel this kinship that she never felt with them before. Um, so I wanna ask this last question, and I'm gonna read this question because I want to make sure that I get it correct. I'm gonna ask Danielle and Curtis. Um, so what do you see as the best description for the Black community in Canada? Still under construction, an elusive or unrealistic goal slash dream, a very tangible reality, or something else? I'm going to say it again so you hear the choices, right? Um, what do you see as the best description for the Black community in Canada? Is it still under construction, an elusive or unrealistic goal or dream, a very tangible reality, or something else altogether? Danielle, what do you think?
I would say that it's still under construction. Because for everything that Kamisha and Nate said, like there's so many different aspects to what it means to be Black, whether it's our cultural differences, our linguistic differences, our socioeconomic differences, um, our our experiences, right? Like we're not a monolith. We are like
Mm,
varying in all of our experiences, just same way that every other culture and group is. Um, but I think that we are now just getting to the point where like Afro Latinos and East Africans and and biracial people um, are being included in the conversation, but in a way that recognizes that they're different from us and not in a bad way. I think that as much as it's important to note those differences and especially like calling people in rather than out when it comes
mm,
to like the lateral violence that we see in our communities, um, but so because that we're still in the process of that, I think that we're still like in the making. Like we have to take into consideration that we were like 300 years of slavery, like hundreds of years of immigration and forced immigration. And so like we are in the process still. Like we're a new people in the same way that like Canada's a new country. Like Canada can't have an identity like Curtis was saying because Canada's brand new. And so in the same way, like we are just getting to a place as Black people that we're acknowledging each other, acknowledging our differences as well as our similarities, and getting the voice that we finally were fighting for so long. So I think with that comes a little bit more building.
Okay. Curtis, same question. Do you need me to repeat it for you?
No, I agree.
Good,
I agree.
Okay.
I agree with Danielle. I think that we are under construction. I think we'll continue to be under construction. And the reason I think that is because, for one, we're now collectively beginning to understand that it is important to allow people to speak to you about what their identity is and to articulate to them to you what their experience is. Having said that, I'll draw the contrast. The United States is typically characterized as a quote unquote melting pot where people are encouraged to become one with the American vision and pursue the American dream. But I think we are all getting smarter. I think we're all beginning to understand that people need to tell you who they are and how they came to be where they are today. That said, there are going to be people who come to this part of the world and their experiences before they came here were very different than they are here. When you're in a place where if you're hungry enough, you can climb a tree and grab some breadfruit and be able to satiate that hunger. That's a different experience than being in the middle of Toronto where your access to naturally grown foods are limited. So your experience as an individual is going to help shape who you are and how you fit into the larger puzzle, how we as a collective address an issue. So I think that it's really important that we acknowledge that in addition to that, we have people who just don't subscribe, who say, that's not my experience. I hear Black people say, I have never experienced racism, which stuns me, absolutely stuns me. Because I guess what they feel racism is I've never had someone come up to me and use an offensive term. And maybe they don't necessarily understand how systemic racism has shaped their lives or their experiences. But the reality is if we decide to band together as a group and try and fix and address an issue, there will be some of us who think that issue doesn't affect me. I live in a comfortable home. I pay my taxes. The police are protecting my neighborhood. And they just don't feel like they need to march in solidarity because they have a different lens, right? Yeah. So that said, I think we'll always be under construction because there will always be different people with different experiences. But if we can link together and understand how our identities are unique, but at the same time, we have some shared experiences. We're seen through the same lenses. We face some of the same threats in different parts of the world. I think we can come together and really work together to build something stronger and better.
Thank you so much. I just want to take this time to thank all of you for being here, for participating. I think we had an amazing, rich discussion here, and I'm hoping that those who were listening were able to identify with what was being said, and I hope that they were also pleased with the way we handled these topics. I know I'm pleased. I want to just let everyone know that we are going to be back. We're hoping to potentially have a town hall in 2 weeks. So just look out for that. Also, please do check all of our platforms again. We've got a new series that'll be coming up a little bit later. The shirt that I'm wearing, Hear Us Out, that is the name of the series. It is, as I mentioned before at the top of the program, us going to different barbershops and beauty salons and presenting pieces and then having those in attendance talk about what it is that they've seen. And believe you me, some of the answers that we've had will just blow your mind. So please do stay tuned for that. Again, thank you to our panelists, Curtis States, Danielle Burkett, Kamisha Siblis, and Nathaniel Frey Smith. That's how the Jamaicans say it. It's actually Smith. Okay, but I just want to thank you guys for sharing your wisdom and just waxing poetic on these topics. And again, I hope that you guys will come back when we call on you, because we will be calling on you again to share and just to build together. Thank you everyone for joining us, and stay tuned for more from GIA God is Awesome Productions.
Thank you.
GIA.